Welcome to The Riff, where writer and investor Bern Hobart and I discuss the major inflection points caused by technological change. Our weekly conversation covers the obvious and not so obvious ways in which markets and businesses will adapt as a result. Let's jump right in. Bern, a number of exciting pieces you wrote this week. Excited to get into them. Let's first get into Lambda School and income share agreements, because you actually wrote a piece a few years ago on why YC is maybe the future of higher education, more so than the Lambda School in terms of the actual purpose it serves. We'll link to it. People should check it out. But most recently, Lambda, of course, was in the news for settling and being banned from the ISA market or student lending market. So a market that they left a few years ago, which is unfortunate for the state of ISAs. But you argue that ISAs are actually still a good idea. So why don't you share your thoughts?
Yeah. So, like as a brief side note, my piece on YC is the future of higher education. I guess you could say like YC is closer to the future of like elite higher education. And my argument there was like, if I do broadly buy into the Brian Kaplan view that, the social returns from education are a lot lower than the individual returns. Best explanation for that is that education has signaling value, et cetera, which doesn't mean it's worthless. Like actually signaling is a hugely valuable piece of economic activity. A lot of GDP is just signaling because we all suffer from different varieties of information asymmetry, and signals are a way to collapse those. But the question is like, can you get a better, cheaper signal that still gives people the same useful information? And so if you think about like, if you were like a Kaplan maximalist, you're like, vast majority of these classes are worthless, and to the extent that students get value from it, some of it is they are genuinely interested, but they would have learned this stuff on their own. These are like the people who are really benefiting from these classes were the people who in high school were already emailing the professor and saying, I read your paper on this, and on page 8 it looks like there's an error in the equation, so can you help me out here? Those people do exist. They get a lot out of this experience, but median student is just not trying to dedicate all of their life to the acquisition of knowledge. And I don't know that a modern college campus is the best, like the place I would go if I were trying to maximize my knowledge. It probably depends on the campus. I'm sure some of them are they vary. But if you were trying to do like the Kaplan-esque, okay, we're going to take what's good about Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and we're going to maximize our ROI, and we're going to try to formalize some of the informal aspects of this transaction just in order to make it more efficient. So we all know what we're putting into it. We all know what we're getting out of it. You might say, okay, we're going to assume that you did the coursework in advance and you're also doing it on your own time. You probably do need to talk to relevant experts, but also, you're maybe at a point where you've done a lot of studying and maybe a little bit of practical experience would be good for you. But we do want to keep the part, one of the valuable things about Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, et cetera, is you meet people who went to those schools. You meet people who had the right test scores, had the right extracurriculars, had the right GPA. And, some of that stuff, again, it's fakeable, but it's like expensively fakeable. You at least meet people who either A, are just genuinely really, really brilliant and hardworking, or B, were able to buckle down and accomplish this non-trivial task of getting into a really good school. And so those people are good to learn. So maybe you keep the socializing aspect. In fact, maybe you formalize it. Maybe you say like, the nerdier our student body is, the more that we have to actually say, no, the coursework is optional because you're going to do it anyway. The parties, you have to show up, like do it, get there. Okay, so you've done that. You've got your weekly dinner thing, and you meet a bunch of really smart people. Perhaps you end up doing business with them. They're sort of like that, YC creates a lot of ARR for YC companies. On the other hand, the YC companies, like, again, they're like this very well-selected group. They're busy. They have actual business problems. And if you can solve those business problems, it's probably a good indication that there are other companies whose problems you can solve as well. So, that ARR is kind of engineered, but not fake. It is sort of engineering reality to like engineering their financial statements to reflect what is actually going on. So that's good. And then, another piece of that is you would make it really, really selective and elitist, but you'd actually have people who were were kind of on the academic side of things doing the selection. So, if you, in this version of Harvard, if you go to Harvard and you want to study ancient Greek, you interact with a professor, like a classics professor, who is asking you questions in various dialects of ancient Greek and seeing if you can answer them, and asking you questions about the great works and seeing if you can talk cogently about them. It wouldn't be that you would send a form to an admissions person and only after getting all of these, only after applying a bunch of filters from non-experts do the experts take a look. No, but that means you have a shorter, simpler admissions form. But maybe if it's shorter and simpler, you want to give people ways to indicate real world success. So yeah, you link to the demo, you link to the product, you show them what kinds of metrics you have that demonstrate traction, etc. And the last piece is, okay, part of the way that elite college economics work is that people like their alma mater. Many of them like their alma mater. They give it a lot of credit for the things that they've accomplished, and often that is true. Like, it is really good to have that brand name associated with you, especially early in your career. And so the schools sort of try to claw back some of that upside by guilting people into making large donations once they're more successful. So maybe you could simplify that and just do an ISA. Say, okay, instead of you go to Harvard and then you get your job at an investment bank and then you start your hedge fund and then you make billions of dollars and then some of that money goes back to Harvard. Maybe they just say, okay, you start a company and Harvard owns a piece of it. And Harvard wants you to do a good job because they own a piece of the upside. And once they own a piece of that upside, like if they are actually elite, if they have the brand name to attract the right people and they have the discretion to identify those people, and they also are able to give them good advice, give them good connections, both to their peers and to companies they want to do business with and acquirers and other investors, et cetera. So if you've done all that, you don't actually want this to be gated by ability to pay. Now, the top schools, they are not really gated by ability to pay. Like, if you can qualify for those schools, you can do the coursework. Either your family can afford to just send you there and it doesn't matter, or the school is going to make sure that you can get there and it's like an economically rational decision once you're admitted. But why not simplify that? Why not, instead of having, the intimidatingly high sticker price and then all these discounts and things such that you really only pay what you can afford, why not just say, okay, admissions are free, but we will take equity. So yeah, that is like YC is basically, if you had the idea for Harvard and Harvard did not exist and you had all of the information that we have today, you would just invent YC instead. And yeah, it seems to work really well. Even down to the level of YC droppers, like people who rejected their YC thing, like that, their YC admission, that is its own fun status marker, because the YC status marker, it's still good, it's still credible, but now because it's a well-known signal, people counter signal just to get that extra credit of they're too good even for the best. So that was the YC disrupts higher education, but it's really like YC disrupts the high end of higher education, which is just a different product from the product of someone has finished high school, they have either gone to college but not studied something that equips them for the jobs that they would like, or just wants to make a pivot, or just didn't go at all. That is, more of a vocational thing, and that's what Lambda School is now. Bloomtech is aiming to disrupt, and I think so. They did have this elegant idea, which is the promise of any kind of vocational training program is you will make more money. Like, they are not trying to get people who are advancing the frontiers of computer science. They're trying to teach people, here's what a SQL database is, and if you want to make a living doing SQL, here's how you do it. If you want to make a living, analyzing lots of data and figuring out which ad campaign actually has a good return on investment, we'll give you the skills, we'll give you the toolkit to do that. It's a different category of education, but it's a very valuable one. Like, most people are doing work that requires, like, not, creativity can be a benefit to the work, but it's not a strict criterion. We don't need everyone in every job to be the Leonardo da Vinci of their profession. For some people, a job is a way to pay rent so that they can do things they actually care about instead. And if the pitch is you will make more money with these skills, there is always this question of incentive alignment, because the school gets paid up front, and they get paid, like, normally the school gets paid up front. They get paid whether or not you actually finish. They get paid whether or not you do well. They get paid whether or not finishing actually gives you a credential that you can use. They get paid whether or not that credential actually reflects your underlying ability to do economically valuable work. That's kind of a broken system. And so the ISA approach is you are borrowing money to go to the school. You're only paying back that money if you get a better job, where better is defined in monetary terms, and you're paying back the loan out of the premium between what you were getting well, it's like the premium between 50K and whatever you're getting. Like, you're only paying out of that upside. So in one sense, what Lambda was doing was privatizing a piece of the education system, in the sense that they, instead of funding it by selling something upfront to customers and then, it's caveat emptor from there, it was they are providing this service that is free, can be free at point of use, in exchange for which you pay higher marginal taxes. So it was kind of like Denmark as a service of like, you are going to pay higher taxes, but you're actually getting things for your tax money. It's a pretty good deal, but that it's only in this narrow subset of things. And then they did get in trouble for various things, some of which were actually really bad things. So like there are, and I'm not in a position to independently evaluate the quality of their teaching. I'm also not in a position to independently evaluate what the variance in the quality of the teaching was. My impression is, I've talked to people who did Lambda school, did well, use that to switch to a career in tech and are very happy with it. But I've definitely seen the complaints online from people who say, my instructor knew less about this than I did. They were clearly reading the Wikipedia article out loud and they didn't know how to pronounce any of the words in it. So you have a pretty wide range. On the other hand, it is not as if the American education system is uniformly at an extremely high standard. So I don't know that anyone should be really confident in taking the bet that the median Lambda school instructor is better or worse than the median college professor, median college professor in a typical school. I probably the college professors are more academically inclined. They probably publish more. They probably know the domain better. Are they better teachers? Much more open question. And maybe this points to issues with the higher education system in general. Maybe there is too much of a tie between doing research and teaching, and maybe we've sort of preserved the perception that you're learning from cutting edge experts in the field, but you're actually only interacting with their grad students who, yes, again, are better informed than you, but are also probably not mostly aiming to be professional teachers. And teaching is just, it's a separate skill. So we will note that there are questions on the quality of their classes. We'll note that this was mentioned in the complaint, but was not actually the thing they got in trouble for, because if you open the door to, bad schools should, like schools that don't provide uniformly excellent education should not have access to students who are going with federally funded student loans, the entire higher education sector collapses instantly. So they did, they creaked that door open, slammed it shut. What they actually complained about was, okay, Lambda school says you will graduate without debt. That's not true. You do owe them money, but it's not debt in the sense that you normally think about debt. It is a structured product that is structured in a way where if you are paying debt, like if you're paying interest on your loan, then you are happy with that outcome. Like, it's a good outcome for you and it's a good outcome for them because they're getting paid. There was this frankly bizarre complaint that they say that they make the loan and then that their incentives are aligned, but actually they sell the loan to hedge funds. Look, everyone who is doing specialty finance, like doing some kind of special esoteric loan, those loans are being sold to specialty credit hedge funds. If they can't sell the loans to hedge funds, it's because the loans are not good loans to make and they're going out of business, or there's some legal issue, like what they were doing was not actually legal all along. You don't really want a system where doing anything capital intensive requires that everything be on the balance sheet of whoever's doing it, if there is just a different kind of specialization. Like, there are people who specialize in underwriting loans, there are people who specialize in teaching Python. We don't really need a system where we insist that no organization that does one of these things can not do the other thing. That's silly. I think it would be equally silly if they said, these specialty credit hedge funds that invest in ISAs, they don't teach anyone data science, and therefore they're also scam artists. Like, it's silly. There's a supply chain for this stuff. And in the event that ISAs started defaulting or started performing really badly, the Lambda would not be able to sell them at the same premium. Like, they're only able to sell them because people have the expectation that they'll get paid back. And if it's an iterated game and they've been able to do this several times, yeah, that's fine. At one point, they do complain, and this one was a fun one, because they complained that Lambda School touted a 100% placement rate for a cohort of graduates from their school. And it turned out the cohort was one person who did get placed. So technically true, extremely misleading, but you could sort of if someone asked you under oath, was the graduation rate for that cohort 100%, you'd be legally and morally compelled to say, yes, it absolutely was. It was exactly 100%. And so that is, a game that they played with numbers. It is certainly not the first time that any school has played games with its placement numbers in particular. They love to do that. They're very good at it. It is like a core competency of some schools. And they are not the only, schools are not the only institution that does this. So at another point in the complaint, it has this bizarre paragraph where it says that Lambda school, I think it was something like, Lambda school says that almost half of their students don't have a degree, but the median coding school, more than half of their students do have a degree. But those are the same thing. Like, more than half do and fewer than half don't. Those are just two ways to say the same thing. Like that paragraph is totally compatible with Lambda school having more college graduates than the median coding school or fewer college graduates than the median coding school. It doesn't tell you anything, but the way it was phrased sounds vaguely sinister. And so it does make them look bad. So, you have them on the one hand complaining someone is delivering these technically true but misleading numbers. And then a couple pages later, they are doing exactly the same thing. This is something people do. Like if you want to make an argument about some real world phenomenon, there will almost certainly be data in favor of it. There will almost certainly be data opposing it. You do have to make judgment calls. And if you are advocating for a particular position, your judgment call is going to be, I'm going to cite the stuff that makes me look good. I'm not really going to cite the stuff that makes me look bad, except insofar as it illustrates just the limits of my confidence. And in different contexts, you want to do that in different ways. If you're selling a product, you do want to segment your audience, and Lambda was definitely doing that. Like they were not pitching themselves as an alternative to an Ivy League school. I think they were pitching themselves as basically trade school for programmers, and I think that's a useful thing to do. Like there's as programming languages get better, and as there are more infrastructure as a service companies and just more software products that solve problems for developers in general, there are a lot more software roles that can be closer to a trade, because the really, really complicated stuff where you're actually figuring out the most efficient algorithm, or you are, figuring out exactly exactly what the most memory efficient or processor efficient way to do something is, like a lot of that, you just want AWS to figure it out on their end, and you pay them an amount of money that is more than it would cost for you to do on your own, but is much less than it would cost for the time it takes for you to do that on your own. So I thought that stuff was completely legitimate. And I think what ultimately happened in this was you have this new company coming into a regulated space. They are doing, their core value proposition was good for customers. And if it were bad for customers, they would rapidly be out of business, which is just not true in higher education generally, especially in for-profit higher education, where the entire game is to maximize the amount of federal student loans you get, and then just take that money from students. They can be pretty indifferent to student outcomes past that point. And they try to design their system to be as bad as possible while still qualifying for federally funded student loans. So if you take a market system that is just going to be more sensitive to the actual economic outcomes, it's very likely to lead to a Pareto improvement for everybody involved. And they made some dumb mistakes. I think that part of the lesson is just, if you're going into a regulated business, you should actually preemptively cross a lot more I's and dot more T's. Cross more T's, dot more I's. If you cross your I's and dot your T's, you get fined and banned from the industry. But the net result is we had this financial product that actually aligned everybody's incentives. Now the main company that was doing it can't do it anymore. Now, you still can get the kind of student loan that people complain about a lot on Twitter, because they didn't understand that deferring payments did not mean deferring interest. And also just people are really bad at modeling compound interest. We ended up preserving the least functional, most toxic part of the system. We ended up maiming, crippling, but maybe not killing someone who was trying to fix it. And I think everybody comes out of this looking pretty bad, but the regulators come out looking worse.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Over 100 startups launched today. Do you know who they are? If you're not seeing interesting startups, none of your downstream processes matter. How you source deals at the earliest stages could be your most consequential investment. Harmonic is the most complete startup database, finding new companies as soon as they incorporate and tracking them through IPO. You can create a search tailored to your investment thesis. In one search, filter over company data, including venture stage, industry, and geography, founders and operators' backgrounds, and traction metrics like headcount changes, social media audience, and web traffic growth. Importantly, Harmonic instantly surfaces warm connections to help you connect with founders. The results are delivered on Autopilot, wherever you most need them, over Slack, email, or via API, directly into your CRM, integrating seamlessly into your software stack. Learn why Craft, Bedrock, NEA, and hundreds more trust Harmonic's data by visiting harmonic.ai or use the link in the description. Make sure you mention our podcast, Turpentine VC, during your demo. If you don't already subscribe to Turpentine's industry-leading newsletters, like our new daily AI newsletter, Emergent Behavior, or Media Empires, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power these newsletters is called Beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business. And they built Beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, the Lindy newsletter, and so many more. Beehiiv's founder hooked up Moment of Zen listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code MOZ. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started.
Yeah, I too am a fan and friend of Austin's. I concede that there were a lot of sloppy mistakes. I also believe that they were sort of not equally or symmetrically scrutinized. Sort of the isolated demands for rigor, variety, and agree with the advice in entering regulated spaces. But I sort of want to present the bear case on ISAs as a former fan of ISAs. I wrote a post we'll link to in the comments with sort of a request for startups in ISAs. I backed a few. I was considering starting a company there at one point. And one company I backed this founder, Sean Linehan, who's the VP of product at Flexport, who I now work with on another business that's about outsourced engineer recruiting called Squad. He started this business called Placement, which was aiming to co-locate people to cities where they can earn a higher income. And so the business was, hey, we'll pay your costs to move, and you'll get a new job, and then we'll get a percentage of revenue from that new job. And so, or whatever the difference is in income potential. And he came up with some conclusions about the ISA space that I thought were kind of interesting. First, he realized that people don't want to move. People are not as mobile as you would think. But then he realized ISAs had the following problems. One is that they're really confusing for customers. So people think of them as exploitative. There's this, sort of stigma of indentured servitude that people can't quite get over, even though they're more favorable than debt in a variety of cases, and they align incentives better, et cetera. But that's one barrier. But then the other barrier, and this one was less obvious to me, is that it in some ways incentivizes poor behavior. And I think Lambda had this problem too, where people would go through the course. Well, often they would be, at least in Sean's case, if they have less skin in the game, they might be less likely to finish the course. But if they do finish the course, they kind of have this weird incentive to not pay, or sort of you go through the course, and then if you are negative enough about your experience, maybe the business will get you off the hook, and you won't have to pay, because the reality is the company's not going to go to small claims court and sue, and they don't want to have a negative brand. Right. So you had these like small amount of people who ruined it for everybody, where they went through the course and they were like, this is a scam. And then, the company would say, okay, well, you don't have to pay, just shut up and go away. And then other people realized it, and it sort of creates this, incentivizes poor behavior if the people going through it don't have the right incentives, or the right morals, I should say, because incentives are to get out of it by any means necessary. So consumers are confused, but to summarize, consumers are confused, it incentivizes poor behaviors, TBD on the regulatory environment, and also financial markets aren't super supportive yet. And that all creates this like perfect storm where it's like hard to build an ISA business because there's a lot of controversy around it. It doesn't your customers won't comply with it always. And that's one of the reasons why Austin himself moved away from the ISA business a few years ago, even before all of this happened. And so I too would love to see ISA businesses bloom because they align incentives in better ways, and it could unlock a ton of capital and opportunity. But here are some barriers and threats I wanted to bring up as well.
Yeah, I think that does make a lot of sense. Like there is this whole category, this whole universe of interesting financial products, which basically would do very well in a world where everyone were an interesting financial products nerd, and will just not do very well in the real world. And it is always a struggle, because a lot of this stuff, to a lot of people, is just not especially interesting. Like the things that are really interesting about this product that I, happy to rhapsodize about on demand, they are just kind of boring to the average person who, they want a better job, and they're looking for the most cost-effective way to get that. So they don't really want to talk about the details and mechanics. And there's always the hope that if you give people some kind of financial education, you give them a table of, here is what you would pay if you went from making 40K to making 80K or 120K, and here's how much better off you would be having done that if you end up getting that really good job. But people tend to sort of look at, they might look at that table, say, okay, that makes sense, sign the paperwork, and then 5 years later, when they're actually making enough money that they have to pay this loan, what they remember is this was a really good deal and they didn't have to pay anything up front. What they don't necessarily remember is just how much money they'd be paying. You could imagine systems that try to deal with this, but they always end up with some, invasive in some way. Like maybe the system would be more effective if this were just done at the paycheck, like at the payroll provider level, where when you get your paycheck, you just see it right next to FICA and income tax withholdings as just, this is the amount you're paying back your loan. So you never actually have, take home of X, and then you actually get to spend X minus 10K because you're servicing this debt. Something like that could, theoretically work, but then this is also just how we collect things like back taxes, child support payments, etc. So maybe it has the wrong connotation to say we're going to garnish your paycheck. Yeah, that is difficult. And then I think another piece of just a lot of fun consumer finance ideas is, or a lot of new financial products in general, is they're just really hard to sell. The customer acquisition cost is the bane of every novel financial product, that it does not specifically enable some use case that people really, really want. And I think that's part of the tragedy of this, is that ISAs are just a generally good way to handle a lot of incentive problems where someone has to spend money or time upfront. They are very likely to get some benefit in the future. They will be happier getting 90% of that benefit and paying 10% to whoever made it possible. But to actually pitch that, you have to embody it in some specific product. And there's probably, I don't know that there will be a better opportunity to do that than learn to code in the mid 2010s. Like, it was a very straightforward way for reasonably smart and conscientious people to significantly increase their earning power. So it was like the one wedge that would make this kind of thing work really well. And it's interesting to go back and look at the history of just new financial products in general and look at how hard they were to sell. Like index funds, there was this huge revolt against them in the financial services industry. People felt like this is just giving up. It's un-American. Like literally competitors to Vanguard were printing propaganda posters and distributing them, talking about how bad this is. And now it's just a default part of the menu of financial options. With credit cards, the initial Fresno drop had a huge fraud rate, and dealing with credit card fraud was a big problem for a long time. It's just really fortunate that the bank that backed it really bought into this idea and that they had really good people running it. 401ks, like for a while, the only company that had a 401k was some kind of tax advisory or savings company, and they had a 401k for their employees, and they were trying to market 401ks as a really good retirement savings option. It took a long time for anyone else to use it other than this one company. So it is just weirdly hard to get people to adopt new financial products. The customers are very expensive to acquire. So when there is some opportunity to actually get a bunch of people using some new product, then it's really unfortunate for that to go away, whether it's through missteps on the part of the founder or missteps on the part of the regulator, or some really unfortunate combination of both.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've long wanted this this sort of betting on people concept to exist, where if I identify Bern's newsletter early on and I'm like, hey, this is going to become really big, whether it's a Substack writer or an artist or musician or Twitter account or Instagram account, I want to be able to get credit for that discovery and also get upside, and not just to subscribe, but also invest. And the only way we can really do that on people is if they have a startup or something. And so there has to be more ways to do that, and not just, but also people who are young, but maybe in a part of the world, young and brilliant, but in a part of the world where there isn't a ton of opportunity, but they, demonstrate it somehow, and they're not starting a company. But you want this idea of being able to support them while also benefiting in the upside. And what's interesting is that a lot of this people who are interested in this kind of financial innovation go to crypto, right?
Right.
A lot of people who are interested in personal tokens and things like that tried to imitate versions of it. And crypto draws a lot of people who are interested in financial innovation or regulatory innovation because it's kind of the wild, wild west there. And they haven't figured that out, but it's just interesting to note that a lot of experimentation happens there.
Yeah, so one of the big problems with it is just you need a counterparty, right? So if you're just making a bet on me and I'm not involved, you have to find someone who wants to bet against me. And then the two of you have to agree on a price. And if you came to them, they ask themselves immediately, what do you know that they don't know that makes you so confident in this bet? And so they're going to quote you, a price that reflects this sort of insurance kind of risk. And even then, they will probably find that in a lot of cases, they just get blown up. These markets like this do exist on Manifold. And so it's, a virtual currency that you can convert into charitable donations, and you can just have arbitrary prop bets on anything. I had a Manifold market on how many hours it would take me and my wife to assemble a trampoline one time. There are Manifold markets on whether or not someone will get a girlfriend, or whether or not they'll get married, or whether or not they'll have a kid. So it does exist at small scale and for fun, but it's just really hard to make a market. And one of the neat things about startups, like one way to conceptualize startups, is that it is a personal prediction market that engineers the need for a counterparty by having this person work on some task that requires money. And if they require money, they are a willing seller of stock in basically themselves, in the outcome that they're trying to produce. So they do become your counterparty. But that's like the one weird edge case where buying stock in somebody would make, or it is the rare edge case where it would make sense. Also, because of the more power law kind of distribution to these things, you can put a little money into a lot of startups, and there's a chance that one of them does really well and makes up for all the losses. Whereas if you're doing startup style investing and you're looking for another case where people have this counterparty need, maybe it is something like they're going to move, they need to buy a house, or they would prefer to buy a house, and you put down X% of the down payment, and then you get some percentage of their salary premium once they're in their new city. And then again, you have the same collection problem that you mentioned earlier, so you do have a counterparty, you do have a case where there's a market, both sides can come to some agreement on things, but you also just have this question of, will your dividend check get lost in the mail? And it only takes a few instances of that in a product that does not have, where most of the results are pretty close to the center of the bell curve, for the outcome to look pretty bad. So, there is a reason that you can borrow a lot of money against a house, which the bank doesn't want to actually have that house on their balance sheet. They don't want to liquidate it, but they can liquidate it. It's not just a loan to you personally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's segue into some of these other topics you wrote about. One is on identifying the source of AI content. Speaking of incentives, some people want it to be easy, some players want it to be difficult. Why don't you unpack that?
Yeah, so I had noticed that there are some companies that have some consumer-facing generative AI tool, like Snap, for example, or I think Dolly doesn't do this anymore, but used to, where there is a watermark. And it does make sense if you have some ecosystem where lots of people are sharing lots of content. It's just qualitatively different to have content that was AI generated rather than human generated. And as I was thinking about this, and thinking in particular about Meta's attitude towards it, I realized that there are a lot of communities on Meta that are ostensibly like people are posting media and they're interacting with it, but really the media they're posting, the picture or the video, it's proof of work. It's something they did. So like communities, I've seen post. I'm not a member of any baking communities on Facebook, but I've seen people share screenshots of really obviously AI generated cakes and all of the comments from people who are just really impressed with that cake. Now, the purpose of that community is not beautiful depictions of cakes. The purpose of that community is people who like cakes gathering together and talking about their shared love of cakes and having these little social micro interactions and these kind of parasocial relationships where they like this person, maybe they think this person's overrated, etc. It's like a nice little community thing. It gets people that it scratches that itch to just have some human interaction based on shared common interests. And so it does completely pollute that if you can make an arbitrarily impressive looking cake in Midjourney instead of your kitchen. That's bad. And Meta doesn't want that. Like, they don't want people realizing that they're all interacting with just bots any more than a dating site would want people to think that they were all interacting with bots. And this is, there's a wonderful short thesis. I think the person who wrote this short thesis was writing it in a country that had very strict libel laws. So he took the blog post down. So I won't identify the author, but it was a really, really good short thesis where he said there was this company in the UK that had dating sites. A lot of the app reviews said it was scammy. He decided to check it out. And so he created a profile and talked about how he's morbidly obese, has all kinds of health problems, doesn't have a job, is, really misogynistic, etc., and has incredibly high standards for whoever he dates. And he said that within like 60 seconds, he was getting messages from women who really, really wanted to meet him. But unfortunately, he had to buy credits on the site to respond to their messages. So that was enough information for him to short the stock. And the company did go after him legally, and so we had to take the blog post down. But those kinds of sites do exist, and those companies definitely do not want people to be under the impression that these are fake accounts. So there's on sites where the fundamental thing they're mediating is human connection, they strongly prefer that AI content be watermarked or that they detect it. But then there's a different category where you really want the AI to be undetectable, which is stuff like an LLM-based customer service agent, or having a customized cold email written by an LLM rather than a human being. Like this stuff, I would say those are categories of very different levels of annoyingness. I don't really want to get LLM generated sales emails, but I'm pretty much fine with interacting with an LLM customer service agent because probably it is faster than me just digging through the documentation and finding the answer myself. And most of them presumably have a trigger. Like, these companies are not setting up the customer service LLM and just immediately firing every single customer service person they have. They presumably keep at least a skeleton crew and perhaps like the same number of people, and just when customers have a serious issue that's not addressed by the documentation, that person is updating the documentation. They're also probably sending a note to the product team, or maybe they get merged with the product team saying like, 30% of our customer service requests are because the buy now button is hard to find. Maybe we should make the buy now button a little bit easier to see. That might actually be somehow beneficial to revenue. Just a theory. So in that case, like I don't think it's a huge problem to be interacting with an AI, and I think that it's probably not a great use of the lifetime of the limited finite lifetime of the person who would be typing those responses in for them to do that instead of having an NVIDIA GPU do it for them. So that seems like a case where you actually want to blur the distinction between talking to a human and an AI. Like you want the AI to be a prosthetic for a human who is doing things that humans are good at and not doing things that are better done by computers. So you do have this whole continuum, and what I think we'll end up doing is just interacting increasingly with continua of sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's human. You can imagine a case where you and a friend want to meet for lunch. You could share Calendly links or share calendars or go back and forth. Is one good? No, I've got a hard stop at 1:30, etc. Do you want this? Do you want barbecue? No, I'm vegan now, etc. But if you just have an agent, if you have an agent and the person you're talking to has an agent, the agents should probably hash that stuff out. If the agents can look at your calendar and the agents know your respective preferences, they can probably find where in the Venn diagram of time, place, cost, expense, all of this stuff where everyone's going to be pretty happy. So I think that is a better world. Like it's a world where I spend less time dealing with logistical things that are just not my favorite thing to deal with, and more time enjoying the fruits of those logistical things, like having lunch with someone I haven't talked to in a while. So I think that's probably roughly where we'll end up. That we'll have on platforms that are about human interaction, we'll have well-labeled AI, but for a lot of human interaction will discreetly be AI inflected, because AI is just the fastest way to get the boring stuff out of the way and focus on what's important and interesting.
I want to use that to segue into Meta more broadly, because you also wrote about how they're thinking about sort of the Llama 3 and open source more broadly, and what that means to them. So why don't you unpack that more broadly when you wrote about?
Yeah, so Zuck gave a great interview on my second favorite podcast, the Doorcash podcast, and part of what I liked about it was just Meta, they've been spending money on AI for a while. They've been talking about AI for a while, and it did kind of look like they caught up surprisingly fast and were releasing these very powerful open source LLMs that, depending on exactly when you take a snapshot of the results, like they were at parity with, maybe slightly better than, maybe slightly worse than the most powerful closed source ones. And that was really interesting to me. And I sort of wondered, did Zuck read attention is all you need back when it came out and just immediately change his mind and start investing heavily in this? And maybe, but the story he gave was no, they actually bought a ton of GPUs to target Reels content, because if you remember a few years ago when Meta was a dying company that was completely obsolete and Mark Zuckerberg was the worst CEO in human history, part of the bear case was TikTok is eating their lunch. People want to watch short videos. They don't want to, engage on a traditional feed. And Meta did respond to that change in usage patterns. So they started doing short video content. And the really interesting point that I had not thought about before, but that Zuck made, was if you are targeting, like, it is a non-trivial problem if someone has 300 friends on Facebook and they are consistently posting updates. It's not trivial to figure out which update matters more and which update matters to whom. And sometimes you can cheat and say, okay, big life events, you probably want to see this. On the other hand, if the big life event is like your ex, who you're still friends with on Facebook, just got married to somebody else, maybe that's actually the kind of life event you'd prefer not to hear about, or at least not to have at the top of your feed. So it's not a simple problem. It's a problem they put a lot of time into, but it's a constrained problem. You have a set of people who are posting a set of things, and you want a ranked list, and you have a fair amount of signals because these people already know each other, they've been interacting, so you actually have this sense of what they have in common, what their relationship is, etc. But once you go from one person to their peer group to like one person to anyone on the internet who could conceivably want to watch this 15-second video of a kitten, then it's much, much harder to rank things well. And so Meta was like, you couldn't. So I guess the way that TikTok solved that problem was with money. It was with money that went to Meta. Actually, a lot of it went to Meta, which was they just bought a lot of ads, and those ads got them a lot of users. Many of those users would literally watch one video and never come back, but a few of them would watch a handful of videos. And because they were generating data through just viewing and choosing what to view next, or continuing to watch, TikTok did start to get a sense of what makes an addictive, engaging feed. And it also meant that they were getting more, like some fraction of those people would actually upload videos, and those videos are also good feedstock for additional ads. I think TikTok, I forget where this gets talked about. It might be in the book, The Attention Factory, that the original ads would actually tell you what TikTok was. But after a while, they realized the ads that convert better are just extremely surreal videos that got popular on TikTok. That turns out to be what people wanted to click on. And so as you get a bigger audience, you get more surreal videos, and also people know what they're getting into. Like, you can basically think of it as TikTok, when they did that, they were extending the product into the Meta newsfeed. They were giving you like a TikTok button that would take you to, like, you watch this one surreal video, you tap it, and now you are continuously watching these same surreal videos and continuously giving them better information. So Meta could have done that, and it would be pretty much the same thing, which is they would replace some of their organic content with Reels. They would know that the vast majority of people are not going to like their initial recommendations. Some fraction of them will. You start collecting data, but all of that data has a huge opportunity cost, so you're constantly burning money. And if you think about this opportunity cost, like if they're spending 5% of their revenue on this, that's $5+ billion at the time. So it actually, maybe the cheap way to do this is spend a couple $1 billion on GPUs instead, and start building more elaborate models, training them with whatever limited user data you get, and then quickly upping the Reels penetration of the newsfeed as they get more data and more confidence that they can show people the stuff that they will actually want to watch. But then it turned out to apparently just that targeting plan turned out to get done faster than they had anticipated, perhaps faster than they worried. So they had a lot of compute and did not have the pressing need that led to them buying that compute in the first place. So they did actually have the spare resources to train LLMs. And I think you can look at Meta and LLMs in a couple ways. I've been fond of this idea that since Meta is probably the best at just moderating text content. They have a ton of experience with that. They have a ton of experience moderating image-based content too. And that is just one of those things where you need a lot of experience to get good. You need to tag a lot of photos as this is actually not something we want on our site, or you need to tag a ton of content for specific cases like bullying, where bullying, if you look at their transparency reports, they give you the percentage of times that this content got taken down automatically and percentage of times it got taken down by user flags. And bullying for a while was a case where they really underperformed. They actually had to have users tag something as this is bullying. And I think it's because bullying can be very sarcastic, and sarcastic things that sound like bullying can also just be people joshing with one another in a friendly way. So it's tough, but their bullying numbers have gotten a whole lot better. So in a world where it's easier to generate arbitrary content and just put it into a comment box somewhere, that is a world where that kind of moderation becomes significantly more valuable. But I think that is not the only thing that Meta could do with generative AI. The other thing they can do is you can take that same continuum earlier, you can extend the continuum where on one end you have, okay, of your couple hundred friends and the couple dozen updates today, which one is the best? Okay, now we're going to extend this to the 10 million creators who uploaded some kind of short form video. Which of those videos are the best? You can extend that further and say, in a hypothetical world where there were a trillion creators and where any conceivable interest you had, someone would have filmed a reel about it, someone would have written an article about it, etc. What would that be? And how can we show that to you? And I think there's not a big difference in terms of lived experience between you used to see updates from your friends, now you see updates from mostly, semi-professional entertainers, to you see updates that were generated by robots trained on the output of millions of semi-professional entertainers. Like either way, you have no actual relationship with this person, and you don't expect to. Like you don't really feel like you know them all that well, and so it doesn't entirely matter if they're fake. So I think that's part of where Meta is going, and that also means that they can backfill the fact that people used to update. They used to post a lot more Facebook updates. It has dwindled. Instagram still big, but I'm sure when you look at any curve, there is any usage curve for any Meta product, there is some nth derivative that goes negative, and that eventually results are dominated by that. Eventually, it's like if the pace at which people keep up, the pace at which they increase their photo uploads starts slowing down, eventually the growth rate slows down, and then eventually the number of photos slows down, and eventually it's a ghost town. And at some point between now and then, I think the bet is the photos that they can generate are going to be, or the photos that they can aggregate from outside of your immediate network are going to be so much better that the fact that they are not from your friends and peers is not going to matter that much. So it is just gradually moving from a communications medium to a mass media kind of product, but I think in a way that happens to any communications medium. Like anytime you have a way to communicate with people, there will be people who are better or worse at that. The people who are better at that just turn into de facto celebrities on whatever platform that is. And I think that like generative AI creates the sort of the eigen celebrity, like the celebrity who would exist in a world that was full of people like you. That celebrity will exist for you when you're looking at your feed, if the feed is increasingly influenced by generative AI.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I want to focus on a couple of last pieces you wrote, so I'll get right to them. This idea that the privacy, security, and usability efficient frontier is set by hardware. Why don't you talk about that?
Yes. Yeah. So this is a fun one. I had always assumed, and it was perhaps a naive assumption, but I'd always assumed that the way that something like Alexa or Siri works is it's listening to you when you say the magic word, like it's listening to you, it's sending that text to some very efficient computer in a data center somewhere, and that's running some kind of, audio, like voice recognition software. And when the wake word gets said, when you say, hey Siri, when you say, hey Alexa, then it starts processing your commands, but that it's always listening and, presumably just deleting everything as it comes in. But that's not true. The wake word processing, at least for Alexa, is happening entirely on device. And one of the reasons for that is just, it's an efficiency concern. Like, you don't want to be paying for 24/7 bandwidth in order to capture like 30 seconds of audio per day. But another reason is there is this privacy concern. People don't like having an always on microphone in their home that is sending everything it hears to some big corporation that has promised to treat the data well. No one really wants that. And it turns out that, at some, there is some level of hardware speed and voice recognition technology where the only feasible way to do it would be have this processed at some large and very efficient data center. But there's also some level of efficiency where, no, you can actually process it on device. You're saving bandwidth. You are preserving consumer privacy. But this also applies to other things. So Meta, one of the things that they recently shipped was Instagram's nude nag feature, where users under 18 are told you probably should not be sending your friends DMs that are nude. And also, if you receive a nude image through DMs, it automatically blurs it. Now, again, blurring, it's non-trivial. There's some expense involved in detecting things. There's some expense involved in altering the image, and then you've got to send it back to the user. So this is the kind of thing where, if you told me that my task is, I'm going to look at hundreds of billions of images. I am going to find the 0.5% of them that have X feature, and then I'm going to blur out that feature. I would assume that this gets done in a data center, but no, it also gets done on device, because that way the images can be encrypted the whole way. So Meta never sees them. They don't live on Meta's servers in their clear text for, their clear decrypted format. They only get decrypted on the user's device. And then one of the steps in that decryption process before it's shown to the user is detect whether there's nudity, blur it out if so, and then on the encryption side, it would be detect whether or not there's nudity, remind people they have a long life ahead of them and they can't unsend this photo. So I thought that was it's a really pro-social thing to do. Of, there are some behaviors that you'd ideally want them not to happen, but you also know that actually banning them is just this insanely intrusive thing. The straightforward, simple way to do it is make it illegal for teens to have smartphones. But one, that's not going to happen. And it's not politically possible. Two, it's just not practically possible. There's the famous tweet from someone who tweeted that she had once again been banned from using her smartphone. And underneath the tweet, it said, tweeted via Samsung smart fridge. So it is just really, really tough to stop teenagers from behaving irresponsibly, and doing so in any meaningful way does involve massively violating their privacy. But with sufficiently, with enough iterations of Moore's Law, with fast enough low power consumption hardware, and with some low level programming tricks, you can actually do a lot more of that stuff on their device. So you are, at least nagging them to behave themselves, think a little bit further in the future, think about how they'll feel about this when their frontal cortex matures, but you're not doing it in a way where, Zuck has your dudes.
Encouraging future.
That's always been the dream.
Exactly. Talk about index funds and why do critics overstate their case?
Yeah. So my feeling, my personal feeling about index funds is I don't use them, but it's because I find this stuff really fun. And so it would be kind of selling out. It is, it's I could replace my squat rack in my garage with a nice pulley system, but that would miss a lot of the purpose of what I'm doing in there. So, I'm a special case. Actually, I'm sure a large number of diff readers, perhaps the majority, are not really going to put a material amount of money into index funds, or if they do, it's not the money they're thinking about. It's not the fun stuff. But a lot of the critiques go too far. And what a lot of people worry about is there is this question of, okay, if everyone were indexing, no one would be around to set the prices. Prices would have no connection to economic reality. And then, of course, the counter to that is, well, if that world ever happens, I'm dropping everything and just trading all the time, because there will be enormous opportunities. People will provide me with effectively infinite liquidity at really stupid prices. And I'm not really, even if you can restrict things to market participants, that's artificial. The more prices get out of whack, the more the marginal participant who sets those prices is actually the CEO and CFO of the company. Because, and this really annoyingly, the best explanation of this is from an interview with Sam Bankman-Fried on Bloomberg's Odd Lots in 2021, where he talks about how this is a difference between crypto and equities. Is like, if Apple stock drops 99.9%, they're doing a buyback, or Warren Buffett's buying the company, and he's buying it for $2 billion and he's making his money back in a week. But in crypto, if Doge drops 99.9%, Doge does not have a CFO who's going to issue some bonds and do a big buyback. No, Doge is just, that's the new price, is down 99.9%. And what that means is that, like, yes, if prices get out of whack and index funds are buying some really overpriced company because it's overpriced enough to qualify for S&P 500 membership, that company is going to be issuing a lot of stock to those index funds, and then the stock is going to go down. And I think when people, like, sometimes people will have these theories of market manipulation, and the thing you always have to think about with market manipulation is, if you buy to make the price go up, that is how much stock you have to sell later on at that higher price. And in general, if you, like, don't try this at home, but if you buy a ton of some thinly traded stock and then immediately sell all of those shares such that you have a price impact, you will almost always lose money on that. You almost always, like, sell for a lot less than you bought for, because the market is noticing, like, there's this big increase in demand. Prices are going to adjust. They're going to notice it on the other side. Prices are going to adjust. You're just going to take a big hit because the spread between the bid and ask is going to widen because the price is going crazy and the market makers don't know why. So they assume either there's a really informed trader and they don't want to be on the other side of that trade, or they want to be paid very well to be on the other side of that trade. Or, yeah, there is, like, someone made a fat finger mistake and they're going to reverse that fat finger mistake, and you want to be positioned to get the maximum profit from that reversal. Now, there is, like, this theory that what happens with some stocks is that you essentially have a conditional price target, where if the stock goes up enough to qualify for index inclusion, then you should keep buying because the index funds will have to buy, or the index ARBs, who are people who bet on index inclusion and want to sell to the index funds typically, they will buy. So it's like a conditional price target, but those conditional price targets have actually existed before. So one example is, if a stock trades below $1 persistently, it is likely to be delisted. Like, in exchange rules typically require it to be delisted after some point. So you can say that this company, if it got delisted, things would be pretty bad. If management hadn't done anything about this price decline, it's probably because they're really busy with other things because the entire business is on fire and it's just not their top concern, or they literally have nothing they can do about it. But if the price goes above that $1 threshold, then A, delisting is not likely to happen, so the stock's going to be more liquid, so you can maybe afford a larger position. And B, if it went up because management did something to make it go up, then they at least have enough bandwidth to care about that stuff. So you can actually have cases where you buy it at 70 cents, your price target is 85 cents, but conditional on it going to 90 cents, you're actually holding until it's $1.25 or something like that. And this can also be true for things like stocks crossing particular market cap thresholds, where a lot of firms will have some rule that we don't trade anything with a market cap below X. Some analysts will not be able to cover things with a market cap below X. So sometimes those kinds of arbitrary thresholds, they actually matter even in a world without indexing. And then there is, I think, a lot of the complaint, like, people will have these kind of vague complaints. Professional money managers will sometimes have these vague complaints of, like, indexing, it distorts the market, it makes prices disconnect from reality. And I think a lot of that is just managing money used to be a much better job when there weren't index funds, because you were selling two things, one of which is your skill as a stock picker, but one of which is just exposure to the stock market. If it's 1971 and you want exposure to the stock market, you've got to call Fidelity. And if you want performance that roughly tracks the S&P, you probably buy some large cap diversified fund that they have, and they're charging a pretty hefty fee for that because they are paying people to pick stocks, and those people are traveling around and they're talking to management. They're Fidelity is paying commissions. They're talking to analysts, etc. Like there's all this activity. But if literally what you wanted was just buy the stocks that are in the Dow, buy the stocks that are in the S&P, and just leave me alone and do that as cheaply as possible, that wasn't really a service that those firms were offering. It seemed really off-brand to say, like, we are elite financial professionals and we will help you buy a list of stocks that was published by Standard & Poor's Incorporated, which is just trying to list, here are 500 companies that made money in the last 4 quarters and also, are at some market cap threshold. Like, it is an admission of defeat, but sometimes like people just, they were less sensitive to quality, particularly in an environment where the median mutual fund, the vast majority of mutual funds did underperform index funds and did so pretty reliably over long periods. There was like, some studies do find some persistence in managers' excess returns, but often a lot of it is just like if you're a manager who is overweight oil or a manager who doesn't like banks, then in periods where oil goes up or banks go down, your performance is good, but those periods are kind of random and unpredictable. So there is like a lot of persistence in performance goes away because it is due to what we would now say would be a factor tilt or an industry bias or something. But at the time, luck, what people would have said at the time was luck, and luck is pretty much it. It's just a special kind of luck. So like a lot of people are just, they're complaining because their job is a lot worse now. It is just a lot worse of a business to manage billions of dollars as a long only investor focused on large cap stocks. When Vanguard can do that, they can statistically do that slightly better than you. And also they are paying, they're charging 95% less. Just really hard to compete with that. And so, one thing you can do is change what you're working on. You can say like, the market for equities has gotten more efficient and the market for equity management talent has clearly gotten much more efficient. So I'm going to do something else because I know I'm reasonably smart and good at things, and I should find some other market that is as obscure today as equities were in 1976 when the first index fund was launched. But another thing you can do is just complain. And I think a fair number of people have chosen that. But even the complaints, like if your view is, okay, indexing creates some kind of persistent headwind to my results. Like I make 1% a year less, 2% a year less because of index funds. Well, that means there's someone is on the other side of whatever trades you are making that are costing you money. So to someone else, index funds are making them this extra 1 or 2%. And so you're basically saying there's smart money out there, there's dumb money out there, I'm the dumb money. And that's just not something that's a good idea to publicly admit. And a lot of this stuff, like, yeah, maybe there is some style difference where if you are a buy and hold investor, that maybe there is some particular way that index funds make your returns look worse or something. But changing your style in response to changes in the market is it's the hallmark of every great investor. I don't think there's anyone who is way up there on the Forbes 400 who is like the way they make their money today is the way they made their money when they first got involved. Typically they've changed often they've changed a whole lot. One of the biggest activist funds was founded by someone who was a convertible bond arbitrageur. Some like big, one of the other big multi-strategy funds was founded by someone who I think was doing a lot of warrant trading in the 80s and 90s. So like a lot of people, they found one thing that made them a lot of money. It didn't make them as much money eventually, either because they just hit capacity on that trade or because other people figured out, hey, this is a really easy way to make a lot of money. And for some people, it was like, they used to make a lot of money and now they don't, and that sucks for them. And then for other people, it's like they used to make a lot of money. That was proof to them that they know how to find ways to make money. They kept looking for new ways. They kept finding them, and every time Forbes updates their list, they're a couple places higher.
And maybe this is why we see more late stage firms or crossover funds going into venture capital or putting more money, just as an example of exploring new asset classes.
Yeah, like it's and investors. I would say limited partners will often complain about style drift, and they really don't want the fund they invested in that's doing like early stage life sciences deals to say like our big position right now is in crude oil futures. Literally doing that as a venture fund runs into all kinds of regulatory problems. But that kind of figurative thing, like people don't like it. But style drift is just what good investors do. Warren Buffett is not buying microcap companies at less than cash on hand and badgering management to pay a big dividend or something. It's not his business anymore. It's how he made some money, but it was also like the process of making that money, I think eventually gave him these clues that these kinds of companies, they're often cheap for a reason, and there are actually opportunities to apply the same kinds of mental frameworks in a more scalable profession where you also just deal with people who are more fun to deal with. Like it's a lot cooler to deal with a large growing company that provides something customers like, where in any given year, like any given year is better than the year before it. And in any given year, you could expect the next year to be better than that. Whereas, yeah, even if the I don't know, scrap iron dealer that you invested in, it trades at 3 times earnings and it has, if it liquidated its inventory, it would pay back 3 times the stock price. Like even then, like whoever's running that, they might be great, but they're probably running this cheap, underperforming company because they're just not that great a manager, and also they're just not in a really great industry.
Yeah. With that, we're right at time. Bern, as always, a great conversation, and until next week.
Yes, indeed. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Riff. Please go follow and subscribe, give us 5 stars, and check out Bern's excellent newsletter, The Diff, if you haven't already. Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts, to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.